Hello everyone, and welcome to my Week 3 discussion board presentation. This week we learned about alternative dispute resolutions. These methods can be used during conflict negotiations or conflict impasses. And Chapter 4 from our textbook covers mediation and the processes that go towards the proper use of mediation, conflict resolution. So when two conflicting parties arrive at an impasse where they no longer are able to communicate effectively with each other and don't want to give in to each other's demands, a mediator can be brought in from a nonpartisan agency or entity to help bridge a gap between the two arguing parties. To be a successful mediator, you have to have a certain set of skill sets and characteristics, and that'll help that individual open up communication between the two arguing parties. And in the section of core values or principles in the textbook in Chapter 4, a specific author was mentioned, Landsberger, on page 77. And briefly, the textbook just barely covers what his research or paper talked about, and essentially the textbook list 5 of the characteristics that Landsberger proposed that were important characteristics for a successful mediator to have. The 5 characteristics listed in the textbook by Landsberger were of being unobtrusive, being knowledgeable, having an appropriate sense of humor in those scenarios, situations, having the ability to be having the sense with the arguing parties, and a lot of persistence and patience during the negotiation process. So taking a closer look and actually looking at Landsberger's paper from 1956, he actually listed 10 characteristics that a mediator would have to be thought of as a good mediator. He got those 10 characteristics after talking to many mediators and mediation agencies and lawyers that have been involved in disputes and have used mediators. And from the feedback he got from all the people that he was talking to, he came up with those 10 specific characteristics. So originally, his paper, or his main plan in his paper, was to come up with a potential questionnaire or test to be able to screen for good mediators. But first he had to come up with definitions for those characteristics. And after he came up with the definitions and defined those 10 characteristics or traits, he then wanted to come up with a set of intelligence tests to be able to filter out people. So potentially this test could be used by mediation agencies to, when they were in the hiring process, they'd be able to use these tests to filter out candidates and come up with or choose the best mediator candidate from the bunch. Unfortunately, Landsberger had a hard time coming up with specific tests for these characteristics. Personality traits are very hard to test for. So in the end, he just realized that it was better to see which characteristics an individual could have that would make them a better mediator. And depending on which scenario that mediator was going into, certain characteristics would be more preferable versus others, depending on the scenario and negotiation conflict that mediator would be stepping into. Weimer's paper looked at the importance of humor for any mediator to have in negotiating with arguing parties. He cited Landsberger's paper just to emphasize that other researchers had actually looked at the importance of humor in mediator characteristics, and how Landsberger had actually tried to come up with a test that would look and filter out those who had high humor characteristics. And Weimer's paper goes on to discuss the pros and cons of having humor as a mediator during negotiations, and there's a time and place for humor, and it's important for the mediator to be able to balance when to use humor at the appropriate time. Thank you for watching, and I hope everyone has a great week.